This is the On All Cylinders podcast,
powered by Summit Racing.
Your host for today is Summit Racing's Paul Gonzalez with special guests Richard and Greg Gonzalez.
Here we go.
Hi there, welcome to another installment of the On All Cylinders podcast. You got me for your host today, Paul Gonzalez, and if you like hearing stories about the golden days of drag racing, then you are in for a treat. I've got a pair of special guests today, and we're going to be talking about a very interesting individual. Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for asking.
And probably the best way to get started is to have you two introduce yourselves.
Sure. Go ahead, Greg.
I'm Gregory Gonzalez. I'm the nephew of Richard Pancho Gonzalez, tennis champion and drag racer. I'm also the executive director of the Richard Pancho Gonzalez Youth Foundation.
My name's Richard Gonzalez. I'm the son of Richard Alonzo Gonzalez Sr., alias Pancho.
Yes, Pancho Gonzalez, certainly a name well known to tennis fans, but I'm guessing most of our audience are more the gearhead persuasion. So when we heard about Pancho's drag race resume, we knew this was kind of a story that needed to be told. But before we get too much further, you should visit OnAllCylinders.com because there's a story component that goes along with this podcast. Go to OnAllCylinders.com, type in keyword tennis into the search bar, and you'll see that article, and it's chock full of more details and cool vintage historical photographs of Pancho, some magazine clippings, and some pictures of that dragster we're going to talk about here in a second. So I guess without any further ado, Richard, you can kind of pick it up there and explain how Pancho's passion for tennis kind of intersected with hot rods and drag racing.
I think it's a big part because of the combination as well. He combined the tennis with the drag racing. Of course, tennis was a more serious area of his life because it's the way he made his living was basically that. Drag racing, there was no money in drag racing. All he did was spend money. But his love, I think, developed for speed the moment he probably got around an engine that started up, and his love for the sound of an engine was incredible, and he had an incredible ear for it.
One of the things they used to say is he played tennis so he could afford to go racing. And then the other thing that's important, though, to recognize is he's probably the very first pro celebrity or big celebrity or athlete that got seriously involved in the racing and stuff.
And I don't think we can stress that point enough because so much of our audience is familiar with the drag racing scene. It's difficult to overstate how big of a deal Pancho Gonzalez was to the tennis world. I mean, specifically for the era, right?
So he became a top junior in Southern California, and then he got banned from tennis.
One of the reasons they wouldn't allow him to play junior tournaments was because he didn't go to school. All he did was play tennis. So Perry T. Jones, who was the president of the Tennis Association, local, would not allow him to play in tournaments if he had a chance to play tennis all day long, and all the other kids had to go to school and couldn't start practicing until after they got out of school. So it was a lesson he learned, but he overcame it by putting his time and effort on the tennis court to good means. It wasn't like he was out screwing around. He was out doing something that it was his lifetime work.
And he came back when he was about 19, and after only playing for about a year and a half, he won the U.S. Open, what is now the U.S. Open. Then he came back the next year, won it again. Back then, the slam tournaments were amateur tournaments. So he turned professional. And during the 50s, he was the best tennis player in the world for about 10 years. He played through the 70s. He was still at 44, one of the top 10 best players in the United States. He was, and some people do claim, he was like the Muhammad Ali of tennis. But unfortunately, because now they count Grand Slams to determine who the GOAT is, he gets left out a little bit. But that's starting to change, and we're trying to get his story out there. But he's probably one of the top 5 best players in the history of the sport.
Okay, so I guess the question now, I know we've alluded to this earlier already, but when did Pancho's fascination with automobiles really take off into a serious interest in hot rods and drag racing?
Well, what I recall was that where we were living at the time, all I remember really was Dad bringing race cars home. And primarily the first one that I recall was a 34 three-window coupe that, they worked on the garage in, and then they had old flathead engines, things like that sitting around. And I used to go in the garage and be nothing but a pain in the butt, really, because I wanted get my nose and everything. But I believe Greg will clarify that his dad, my Uncle Ralph, was originally the one that had friends that were involved in just souping up cars, I believe. You know, they wanted cars to go fast, and Dad got around it. That was it, really. You know, he just he got the bite, and it took him in a natural direction for his interests.
Well, first of all, in the early 50s, he was kept off the Pro Tour for a couple of years. He got beaten badly the first year, and they said he wasn't marketable. So they kept him off the tour for a couple of years. And so he used to like to play cards and poker and everything. And what I understand is he won the 34 Ford playing poker. And then he gave it to my father, who at the time was only 15. And he said he was one of only 2 high school kids that had a car at the time, and in his high school. But him and his buddy started trying to soup it up, and then Uncle Richard came by one day and asked him what they were doing, and then after that, that was it, you know. And my dad went to Korea when he was 16. Uncle Richard took the coupe back and really just got into it. Lou Bainey started building flatheads for him initially.
And then Dad went from the flathead engine to the Cadillac engine, and of course that created more horsepower than the flathead did. But then he got into the main crowd, the mainstream of drag racing. He and Ed Eskandarian, well, they spent a lot of time trying to build camshafts for the Cadillac engine. So Dad experimented with a lot of camshafts from Ed for years until they, come up with the right combinations. Ed Eskandarian was right down the street from us. So there was a heads knockout deal with the Cadillac engine when Dad first started running it. But he got it to perform just as well as any other engine that was running at the time.
And it was Pancho's Cadillac engine with that Isky cam that went into the dragster that Don Rowe drove to the New Gas World ET record, right? Is that the event that really put Pancho Gonzalez on the drag racing map? Or did that event put him on the map to begin with?
No, I don't think he really had, in my opinion, that he really had that much national exposure because it wasn't really covered nationwide at the time like that. It was just a local thing where the record was a national record. But I don't know that his name specifically was something that was known across the nation as a drag racer. He was known more for his tennis. Drag racing was just this little thing that he had on the side, and they were fortunate enough to put the engine in the car and run the record. The record, it didn't last that long, but it was a record. I don't know for sure that he was nationally known for his drag racing. My Uncle Ralph and my Uncle Manuel mainly were the ones that campaigned the car because of Dad not being allowed to drag race because of his contract with the tennis tour.
The record was held in another frame. There's a chassis builder named Joe Ito that Richard knew and everything, and they put my uncle's Cadillac engine in it. I think Joe challenged him to put it in there, and then they broke the gas record at that time, the world gas record.
And for those folks following along at home, this is 1957, the quarter-mile record for gas, 9.7 seconds.
I've met some guys that, let's say were back east or up north at the time, and they'd read drag news and everything. They might have been aware. But you have to recognize, too, at that time, drag racing wasn't really that big in the late 50s. It was just kind of starting to emerge, They had the first national event in 55, I think.
Drag racing started mainly with a bunch of Bonneville Salt flat racers who, Bonneville only ran once a year. So they were looking for more opportunity to race. And they developed the drag racing, and they could run every weekend. The cars that were early in the drag racing were cars that were built for Bonneville. And there were some pretty nice, early roadster coupe bodies. They used to run, it was like a little belly tank thing. I think it was a fuel tank for a jet fighter or airplanes or something like that. And they run those, but they were really cool looking cars, and they were different to us. Dad's 34 was more or less standard. It's original. The top wasn't chopped or anything like that. But I believe the beginning drag racers, at least in Southern California, were fellas that were looking to race more often than the once a year at Bonneville.
Now let's pivot a little bit and talk about that dragster that set the record. From what I understand, you're trying to restore or recreate that specific vehicle.
Well, that was a previous frame that Joe Ito built. It was Roe, Ito, and Gonzalez. That was the team with Pancho's Cadillac in it. They broke the record in 1957.
The chassis that we're rebuilding now was a secondary to the one that they were originally involved with. But it was the one that, did belong solely to my uncle and my dad. The engine, the dragster chassis, that they had run when he was just getting into the dragster, because what happened was they had a bad accident. Joe Ito was driving the coupe at San Fernando, and they had just set the engine back for more weight transfer, better weight transfer to the rear of the car. And when he shifted into second gear, the chassis snapped in half and rolled him over the fence and almost went into the wash that was to the side of San Fernando drag strip. That really got, I guess, Dad and Uncle Ralph involved in wanting to go faster, of course. So put the same engine in something lighter and it's going to go faster. But, I think they wanted to have something where they could deal with any situation that arose on themselves and not have somebody else to, have to go through in order to do this or do that.
So just to go back, the record was broken with the Roe, Ito, and Gonzalez dragster, and then the one we're building now was more well known as the Gonzalez brothers. As Richard said, they kind of started doing their own thing and went off on their own a little bit.
But it still sounds like you're staying true to the original dragster's recipe. Is it fair to assume that there's a Cadillac power plant remaining between the frame rails?
It was the same engine. It's a little bit of a different frame, but it's the same engine and everything. And with this car, they ran pretty well. They won a lot of top eliminators, and this was a car that they went to the 58 Nationals, and they qualified number 2.
But it was the dragster that sat in Greg's garage, or his father's garage, and that he came home and sat in every day after school. He'd sit in that thing on top of the trailer in the garage.
So was there much left to begin with, or where did you have to start the restoration recreation process?
This is a completely different chassis. It's a brand new chassis. We went through a stage of trying to track down the original car, but we thought we had some live ends at one point, but they kind of panned out. So we decided that the only thing that they could do, because it was, such a part of the early part of drag racing in the Los Angeles area, or I guess you say across the nation, the real pioneers wanting the little 98-inch wheelbase dragster over 160 miles an hour was quite an accomplishment. It was another source of high speed for Dad. It was kind of like when we got involved with the go-karting. He was a national champion in the open C-class go-karting, which is a twin-engine 270cc lay-down kart, the road racing kart, not the sit-up type kart. But it was the same thing. We got a little go-kart for my brother for Christmas, and Dad got into it, and that was it. And we were off to the races. So it went from one engine to two engines to... When we first got the car from my brother, my dad said to try to get something with a heavy chassis because my brother was kind of chunky, So we went out seriously looking for go-karts all through before Christmas, and we found one with about 4-inch tubing rails on the side and thought if that thing wasn't heavy enough, nothing was. But anyway, so that got us started in the karting, and that was another thing that skyrocketed into space.
That ran, 160 at Daytona, Richard? Did they time it?
Oh, the kart was clocked at 160 on the back straight at Daytona, yeah. Pretty fast. They were pretty amazing, much more amazing to drive than even watch go that fast. It was scarier than hell. An inch and a half, 2 inches off the ground, running that fast. And Dad had he had one really, really serious accident. Rebuilt the kart that he had the accident in, and then he had another one in the rebuild car. Front tire blew out on it. That was it for him. The split guardrails they have at the racetracks. Well, he hit as you're coming off of a short straight on the backside of the track, and you go underneath a bridge, and right as you come underneath the bridge, there's an exit for the pit area, and there's these speed bumps just before you get to the exit. Well, when the kart, because it's so low to the ground, when the kart hit the speed bump, Dad hit the throttle of the kart to set it up to go into the turn. And the tires just RPM'd incredibly. The kart came down sideways, and it just shot him into the guardrails. and he went up into the air and flipped twice and came down and landed upside down with the guardrail between the headrest for his helmet and the exhaust. The exhaust was wrapped around the back of the cart, and if it had been 3 or 4 inches further forward, it would have taken his head right off. The guardrail would have just decapitated him. But one of the gas tanks exploded, and I didn't see it happen, but it was just before coming down the main straightaway in front of the pit area. And a fellow he was running along with a fellow who was behind him, and the fellow came around first, and we didn't see Dad, and the guy just put his hand up in the air, in a spinning motion. So I figured something happened, and I ran down to the end of the track, and the guy that pulled him off the guardrail, well, it's dual engine, so there's 2 exhaust pipes that run around the back of the cart behind the headrest, and he leaned on the exhaust in order to lift the cart up off the guardrail. And his poor legs, oh God, the burns were just incredible. I told the ambulance driver, don't let him out of the ambulance when you get to the hospital, the track hospital, because that's where they were going to take him. So that what do? When they first get back to the track hospital, they let him out of the ambulance. And of course, that once he was out of the ambulance, he wasn't going to go to the hospital. And we ended up walking back to the pits. It took us about an hour and a half to walk 200 feet. But it was a terrible ride home. Oh my God, we were in the motorhome. I'll never forget that. What a miserable ride that was.
Getting back to the dragster, so there's been talk about a film being done on my uncle, and everybody recognizes he's a tennis player, but they don't realize he's a driver and loved racing and everything. So we think having the car in there and everything would be a lot more reflective of his life. It's a big dream for all of us. We've been fortunate enough to go to the Hot Rod reunion, and I went with my dad and cousins, and they loved it. And through that, we met a great racer named Wayne King. He's driven about 20 top fuel cars. He's from the Bakersfield area, so he's been involved with some of the famous Bakersfield, the Smokers, Warren Coburn and Miller, some of those guys. And he's kind of like our project manager. And he was able to get a really great master fabricator who's built for years named Jim Hume. So Jim Hume's been doing the build. He's done a wonderful job. Richard's seen his work. He's really impressed by it. And so it all seems to be adding up to something pretty fun and exciting now. So we're excited about getting it done. But having someone like Jim and Wayne involved with the car, too, has been a big plus.
Now, can you tell us anything specifically about that Cadillac power plant? I mean, I know that's what jumped right out at me when I first saw a picture of this thing. If you're used to seeing a dragster with perhaps a big block Chevy or a Hemi nestled between the frame rails, this Cadillac power plant's going to jump right out at you.
It's a 1959 engine that Hugh Reynolds found over there in California. We're very fortunate to find it because he says it was in great shape. And now he's boarded out, I think, to a 406 or 409. And, it's been built to run nitro. Hughes had to build up the bottom end really strong for the nitro and everything. It'll have a 471 blower on it as it did when we ran it. And so it's a strong running engine. Back in the day, they ran gas though when the NHR nitro fuel was going on, but with the Cackle Fest and everything, we decided to go with the nitro.
It stays cooler.
So how's the progress on the build been going? Are you reaching the light at the end of the tunnel?
The frame and everything's pretty much done. Wayne King has the car now, and he's setting up the blower and everything, the drives and some of the plumbing and all that. So we're hoping, maybe by this summer it'll be ready to fire and then maybe be out this fall. So we're fortunate, we have these guys. Iski provided the cam. Iski had the old cam, an old cam.
New old stock, probably pulled it right off the shelf, right?
I guess he's got everything at his place there.
Hey, listen, what's funny is that here's this guy, what was he, 98 or 99 last time I saw him at the meet, and he was walking through picking up cans and bottles out of the trash cans, taking them to the recycle. He's a crack up.
He just turned 100.
Yeah.
He's amazing. He's an amazing guy, a real nice guy.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me to see how far back that relationship went. You sent a whole bunch of like PDFs of old magazine articles and stuff, and one of them included an advertisement advertisement with this dragster for Iski cams.
Oh, yeah, I think so. There was a little sketch or a little drawing of it. I don't know that there was an actual photo, but yeah.
There was an ad, Richard, when they broke the record in the Roe, Ito, and Gonzalez. Iski had it on there. Makes mention of Uncle Richard, and his being world champion and performance and so forth. And
well, next to the LA Tennis Club, Iski's was, I think, Dad's second favorite place.
Now, I know Pancho couldn't fully commit to drag racing with his tennis contracts and all, but it seems like he started to pull back a little bit as the decade progressed. Can you talk about how he kind of eased away from drag racing, at least for the time being?
They got heavy they got the dragster, and, they were running that in 57. By 59, my uncle met his second wife, and she didn't want him driving. My dad had a terrible accident at Lyons in the Roadster and rolled that about 8 times, so my mom was pushing against him. And so my uncle married a nice lady that was from the Hollywood crowd, and she wasn't that much into the drag racing, more the Formula One type of a person, I guess. So she didn't want him racing. So then they ended up putting the dragster at my dad's house, and my uncle would sneak over there almost whenever he could, when he wasn't traveling on the tour, and work on the car, and then they'd sneak out and try and run it at San Fernando and those kind of things. Richard told a story one time. He was on the tour. He flew back into town, went to my dad's house, a couple days early, goes to my dad's house, calls Richard, tells him to get over there. They want to run the car. So he was sneaking around trying to do the racing, when he wasn't supposed to.
At that time, he was doing it as a hobby. It wasn't something where he was involved in, neither one of them involved in racing anymore every weekend. But they would certainly race when they could. And Dad was adamant about racing whenever he had the opportunity. I mean, he wouldn't even let his wives know he was coming back into town before he would call us and say, meet me at Ralph's. We want to run tomorrow. It was scary because I didn't know what to say to. Well, it was Madeline, his second wife. There was a lot of pressure he put on us to do things in order to satisfy his kind of hunger or eagerness to do something. And then he had no idea what else we had to deal with because of his desire to become the best he could at anything that he got involved with, whether it be racing, whether it be golf. Of course, tennis that was his main deal, but anything, it didn't make any difference. He hated to lose. And he wanted to be as good as he could be at just about anything he was ever involved with. I don't know how many 70, 71, 72 Chevelles he had in his lifetime. It was probably his favorite car, I think, to drive around the street with the big block Chevelles. But anytime he bought a car, you knew there was going to be something. The last car, or one of the last cars that we built for drag racing, was a little 55 Thunderbird that I used to drive to school. It was my little commuter. And I went from that car to another car, and that car sat up at the ranch that we had in the Santa Monica Mountains. And then one day I come back, and there's a big block Chevy and this Thunderbird. It was a little stock 396, but you didn't leave anything sitting around for long before he would do something with it, He'd put a small block on a lawnmower if he could. That was the last car, I guess, that Tim Perry built, who was a chassis builder in Las Vegas. And we never even got a chance. Well, we did. We went out one night. Dad and I went out one night. One of the weekends they were having the Allen King Tennis Classic, which was a pro tournament that Caesar's Palace put on. And the fellow that built the car, they were test driving it, and there was a few things that I thought were a little squirrely about it when they were driving it. And I mentioned something to him about it and Dad about checking it out. Well, the next night they decided to take it out and run it again, and they ended up a Heim joint broke in the front end, and it rolled at about 142, 143 miles an hour right through the lights. They've got it down to a 10-15, which was, pretty quick, but it was completely subframed. It was just an incredible thing to look at. It was a great piece of fabrication. That was one of the cars that probably disappointed him, the fact that it was destroyed before he could even sit in it while it was running.
I'm sure anyone who's ever blown an engine on a dyno before putting it in the car can sympathize with that. I know we're kind of running out of time here, but I like hearing about drag racing stories. You got any more Pancho legends you can tell us about?
No, I'll just tell you, we were fortunate, Richard and I. We got to go to most of the tracks. Southern Cal must had 10 tracks. I can remember I was really young. San Fernando, Colton, San Gabriel, Fontana, Lyons. Richard saw even more. The racing was just incredible. One time, my uncle and Richard's two brothers and I went to Lyons in '67 when they had the big PDA meet. We were going to run my uncle's. He had a '68 Camaro with a 427 B-Stalker that was really, I think, one of the fastest in Southern Cal. There was another car that was comparable, but they had so many dragsters that day, they were not allowing the stalkers to run. So he almost wanted to go to Irwindale. We stayed at Lyons. We got to watch a full day of nothing but top fuel, junior fuel, and gas dragsters all day long, nonstop. And so we just got to see some great racing way back in the day. The other thing I'd say, in late 1959, a lot of guys were dying, and my dad lost a couple friends, and it was pretty shocking to him. And one friend he lost, and he was supposed to meet he was at Lyons with him that night, going to meet him the next day at Joe Ito's. And went over there and got the shock of finding out that his friend who he had just seen the night before was gone. There was a fellow by the name of, I think, Leonard Harris. Well, Mickey Brown's the guy I was talking about. That there was a dragster that wasn't handling that well. The story what Dad told me is they asked Mickey and my dad to drive it at Lyons that night, and they both declined. And later on, they talked Mickey into it. My dad left early and went to meet Mickey the next day at Joe Ito's, and he got the bad news, and I think that really shocked the heck out of him. Whenever there was an accident in the old days, Lyons was dangerous because of those damn telephone poles that were down the tower side, and if you lost it there, Greg's dad went right in between two when he rolled the Roadster. We're driving down in the push car, and Dad jumps out of the car before it even stopped moving. We ran over to the car, and he got down on his knees and he said, "Ralph, are you in there?" It was Ralph. When the car started to roll, my uncle, Greg's dad, said he just grabbed the bottom of the seat framing and held on tight. But in those days, things didn't turn out well for the spectators, especially at Santa Ana. The only thing they had between the spectators and the race cars were telephone poles. Just basically a border where you could pull your car right up to the telephone pole. Well, there was a Roadster that ran one day, and the guy lost control, and the Roadster hit one of the telephone poles, and it just catapulted him into the air. The Roadster went over the top of two or three cars, and the safety features that they create now, especially the distance between the track and the spectators, boy, if they'd only known then,
Well, that is kind of the sad silver lining, that a lot of those tragic accidents do result in better safety measures. But let's pivot towards a more pleasant topic. The Pancho Gonzalez Youth Foundation, you can check it out at panchofoundation.org, is kind of carrying on Pancho's legacy by using tennis to help enhance the lives of children, both physically and academically, correct?
Our ideas and thoughts about initially, of course, Hispanic kids, but any kids that want to be involved that may not have the opportunity elsewhere or in any other way to get involved with tennis, is for us to try to provide a learning foundation for them, for us to give them the opportunity to at least introduce them to the game and see how they like it. We've been doing it for a little over 7 years, and a lot of the kids we teach are downtown kids, and it's been a lot of fun. They're really appreciative. It's been a real joy to teach them and everything. By chance, a couple years ago, NHRA has a STEM program. So I took some of the kids I teach tennis to the nationals, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it, which is kind of the timing of the dragster, too. So we're hoping to bring a little STEM learning as the educational piece for the kids and fire up the dragster for them and this and that. We'll see how that develops, but it's kind of heading in that direction. And that's exciting, too, for the kids and stuff. So
if a fire-breathing top fuel dragster doesn't get you excited about engineering, then there's not much out there that will. And in a way, that's kind of why I think stories like Pancho's need to be told. As we evolve into the electric vehicle era, learning that historical component of sort of like the nuanced origins of automobiles and racing in particular is vitally important to the next generation.
The neat thing about it is to bring the originality of where and how drag racing started, and some of the different tracks, of course, in the areas that we're located. But when drag racing was, you got a chassis, I got an engine, we got a driver. Everybody would put everything together and go racing.
My uncle in the area that they grew up in he got involved with Lou Baney, who was very prominent in drag racing, Ed Escuderian, Mr. Arias, Louis Center of Anson Automotive. All these guys were just really close to each other, right, Richard? It was very close proximity.
Yeah, they were. They were a big family, and their attitude about racing was to go out and race. They enjoyed going fast, but they wanted to have a good time too. Nothing stopped drag racing from getting to where it's been now for several years.
And I don't think there's a better note to end on than that. We've been talking with Greg and Richard Gonzalez, nephew and son respectively of legendary tennis star and prominent Southern California drag racer Pancho Gonzalez. Awesome historical stories about the early days of West Coast drag racing in the 1950s. Hope you enjoyed listening. And guys, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us.
All right,
Paul.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Appreciate it.
This has been the On All Cylinders podcast.
Powered by Summit Racing.
Check out new episodes coming soon at OnAllCylinders.com.
OnAllCylinders.com.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.